Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our Road Rules 360 episodes. Actually, it's the last one for the year, John.
It is indeed. 12 months.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. In fact, I think we started last year and we did 6 months worth and then we had to trash them all. That was a bit disappointing. Our purpose has been to go through the road rules one by one. Some of them have been more interesting than others. I actually was at a Christmas party the other day and somebody said, I like your episodes with John, and the ones that I like most are the ones where you disagree, so we have to spend more effort disagreeing.
Well, that's just bound to happen, isn't it? I mean, coming at things from different perspectives here. So long as we get the message across, really doesn't matter whether we agree or not.
Well, that's true, but I think we should entertain and inform,
Yes.
which is our goal. We are not giving any advice. John, you retired 6 years ago, all the usual stuff.
That's right.
I think sometimes we've been a bit bogged down in the legislation, and that maybe has been very interesting for you, but I have found it a bit challenging sometimes to be very inspired and engaged.
Yes, I can understand that. It's not always an inspiring subject, the whole thing of legislation and road rules, especially when you start getting down to the nitty-gritty. It becomes a hair-splitting exercise, not always life and soul of the party type discussion.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely not something you'd want to do on a first date, is it? It's sort of not that type of conversation. Right. Not that either of us are into first dates at this point in our lives. What would you say has been something surprising that you've found from our conversation?
You've dropped that one on me.
I have.
I think it always strikes me that there is a general idea, at least in the state government, to try and replace legislation that is almost indecipherable with plain English so that it is easy for everybody to actually understand. It always amazes me how often they really don't meet that goal or achieve that target, because so much of what we talk about is the idiosyncrasies of different rules that when you look at them you realise that they really are either ambiguous or defy common sense a lot of the time. And that's one thing that's come out. I think also the community involvement, the fact that some people who've got in touch with us and who are interested in what we're doing and what we're talking about, it's good to see.
Yes, as this person that I met at the trade Christmas party said, yeah, he listens to our podcast and he's interested in what we have to say, which is very nice. Yeah, we've had some questions. That's been good, and we've got one today. For me, I was thinking this morning, what I would have wished for more is that I wish I had understood more what you were saying. Because as you were reading the legislation and going through it, and I was speaking out the short title, I didn't really understand what it meant, and I didn't understand often what your explanations were, because I don't drive at the moment anyway, and a lot of them seemed abstract. It's almost like I needed to be on place. As you said right at the very beginning, it would be good to have a video of this, but to do it by audio doesn't give it justice. I think it's definitely fair to say.
I remember when I worked in TMR, one of my favourite pieces of equipment was a whiteboard. It's amazing how much you can do on a whiteboard just by quickly drawn diagrams to illustrate what a road rule means or doesn't mean, and kind of miss that.
I was thinking about the intersection where you said they didn't follow the road rules and it was a cost-cutting exercise, and it was a scramble crossing, I think, a particular intersection where the school children were crossing from a very awkward street where there were, I think, several different intersections, cars coming in, and it was cheaper for the school, it was safer for the children, but the department said no because it doesn't comply with the road rule.
Oh, that was the scramble crossings. There were two ways to look at that. There was a lot of concern, even though these scramble crossings were working and seemed to be working, there hadn't been any accidents. State government being what it is, very risk averse, it was a situation where if an incident had happened, the state government would actually have not much of a leg to stand on. That's the way the state government came at it. So it seemed to work in practice, but when you look at it from a risk situation, it probably wasn't the best situation to have one crossing supervisor supervisor standing there in the middle of a crossroads or a T-intersection trying to guide all these kids across coming from different directions and trying to stop cars coming from 3 or 4 different directions all at the same time. If I was that crossing supervisor, I don't think I would be very happy, but they managed.
Because I, as a pedestrian, I love scramble crossings. So just to explain what a scramble crossing is, if you go into Brisbane and sometimes other cities, it is where you can cross diagonally as well as to the sides.
Instead of just 90 degrees, it's 45 degrees across.
So the traffic stops for everyone, and then you just have this sense of freedom to be able to move. Whereas when you have the standard pedestrian crossing where you have to cross in line with the traffic, often cars are going left or right and you're having to more fend for your life. So scramble crossings are heaps safer. They must have a much lower death rate than...
Yes, I think there's 2 different things we're talking about. The scramble crossings, such as those in the centre of Brisbane, are controlled by traffic lights. No problem at all with them, and they are perfectly legal. The scramble crossings that we were discussing were children's crossings, or established as children's crossings, where the children's crossing basically took up the whole of the intersection, and the only thing that stopped the cars was a poor crossing supervisor standing outside there. Instead of just one sign with their stop sign, it was like a box so that the stop sign was visible from all directions, and they would march out into the middle of this intersection, stop all the traffic from all directions, and then the kids would cross and scramble in both directions, which in fact the kids were doing illegally, because if they were crossing diagonal, that is actually against the rules unless it's at a traffic light scramble crossing.
So there is an idea I've seen out there, various videos, that when you remove stop signs and traffic lights, the traffic becomes safer because the people who drive cars take responsibility for their behaviour. So they come up to intersections more gingerly and are more watchful, so they're slower, rather than, I've got to get the lights quick, which increases pedestrian deaths. And certainly on right turns, that is a big problem. That's the highest danger point for pedestrians. It's interesting talking about this because I don't know anything about the road rules except what I've learned from you and what I can remember, which is not always a lot. But it strikes me that the current traffic light system so heavily biases cars and people in cars. And in fact, I was speaking with somebody the other day at another social event, Christmas event. I'll go to the opening of an envelope, me, always trying to push the cause, Get Around Caboolture. I was talking about a particular intersection. I said, I want the little green man to go for longer than 6 seconds, which apparently is the guide. 6 seconds you get little green man. What this person said is you could extend the length of the flashing red man, which sounds slightly like a flasher, but I don't mean a flasher. I mean a little red man with a flashing light. But I see in Brisbane that they do lengthen that little green man time. It seems then that that is, certainly on council intersections, possible. So if there's a will, there's a way. It's just a lack of political will is the way. That's what it seems to me. Next year, by the way, we are changing our name from Get Around Cabo Car Free to Get Around Caboolture. On one of our episodes, we had Marco Tobromostrat, and he said, why would you name your organisation Car Free? You don't go helicopter free or aeroplane free, or why would you do motorbike free? So why would you do car free? So I decided to change it. It had caused me problems anyway, and I'd never really liked it. So we're changing to Get Around Caboolture, and it'll be getaroundcaboolture.au. That will be our new URL.
Wow, absolutely. I'm impressed.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed our chats, I must say. It's been great because we didn't know each other before we started these conversations at all.
It's developed over that period of time, and it's a mutual respect for what you do and what I bring to it, so it's good. Loving it.
Yeah, it's been great. All right, so today we've got a court case. This was sent in by one of our listeners, a very keen listener. It's great. I always love getting emails from this person. It's from the Court of Appeal, and Allianz Australia Insurance, who is the appellant. There has been a previous court case, and this is the appeal.
Yes.
And the respondent is Christopher Ross Eden, and it was in Brisbane, and the date of this judgment is Wednesday the 3rd of April 2024. The appeal number, if anybody wants to look it up, is 14918 of 2023. I don't know what SC means, but number 1573 of 2022. So the original case, when it went to court, was 2022.
Yes.
And it's case number 1573 of that. Dalton, who is, I guess, the judge, is that what you assume?
I would think so, yes.
Yeah, so Dalton must be the judge.
Yes.
And then I guess the two other people listed under that are probably solicitors on either side. Dalton J.A. says, this case concerns contributory negligence in the context of a road accident. Having consumed a couple of beers, Mr. Eden set off on foot along the Dysart bypass road to visit a friend. It was after sunset and there was no artificial lighting on the road. Mr. Eden was wearing a t-shirt with a white motif on the back and carrying a white plastic bag containing more beer to share with his friend. These things should have helped him make visible. He was heading north and he walked on the western side of the bitumen roadway. The primary judge found that Mr. Eden walked 50 centimetres in from the edge of the roadway and in a straight line parallel to the roadway. The roadway itself was straight. There was no footpath. The verge to the west, Mr. Eden's left-hand side, was overgrown with long grass. The verge to the east was also overgrown. As well, Mr. Eden knew that it fell away sharply into a drain. Walking in this way, Mr. Eden was hit from behind by a Toyota HiLux utility vehicle. It was probably the mirror of the HiLux which struck him. The driver of the HiLux was 80 years old. He gave evidence that he did not see Mr. Eden until he was about 10 metres away from him. No doubt that was his impression, but other evidence of a technical kind proved that the driver must have seen Mr. Eden when he was about 30-35 metres away. The driver braked and swerved to his right in an attempt to avoid Mr. Eden. In doing so, he unfortunately hit a cyclist who was travelling towards the HiLux on the other side of the road. The judge found that the driver of the HiLux was negligent and that was not challenged on appeal. The only issue on appeal was whether or not Mr. Eden contributed to his own injuries by walking on the western side of the roadway in breach of a regulation. The judge accepted Mr. Eden's evidence as to how he came to be on that part of the road at that time of the accident. In leaving to walk to his friend's house, Mr. Eden first walked along the street in which he lived. Then he turned to the right onto a dirt track which connected that street to the Dysart bypass road. When Mr. Eden came to the Dysart bypass road, he chose to walk on the western side of the road because he knew about the steep verge which fell away from the road on the eastern side. He chose not to walk on the verge of the road because the grass was about knee-high and he was worried about snakes and how stable the ground was if there was holes or anything in the ground. Mr. Eden intended to cross to the eastern side of the Dysart bypass road. However, soon after he began walking on the western side of the bitumen roadway, Mr. Eden saw two bright lights coming towards him from the north on the other side of the road. The judge said, "I accept Mr. Eden's evidence that he originally thought the lights were from a motor vehicle, so he stayed on the left-hand side of the road with the intention to pass over to the right-hand side of the road after the vehicle had passed him. It was only when the lights came closer, Mr. Eden could determine that the lights were not the headlights of a motor vehicle, but were two bike riders with bright headlights." Soon after that, Mr. Eden was struck by the HiLux. On this appeal, the appellant relied on Section 238, Paragraph 2 of the Transport Operations, Road Use Management Road Rules Regulation 2009. That provides pedestrians travelling along a road, except if using a wheeled recreational device or a wheeled toy. 1. A pedestrian must not travel along a road if there is a footpath or nature strip adjacent to the road, unless it is impractical to travel on the footpath or nature strip. 2. A pedestrian travelling along a road must keep as far to the left or right-hand side of the road as is practicable. And B. Must, when moving forward, face approaching traffic that is moving in the direction opposite to which the pedestrian is travelling unless it is impractical to do so. B. Must not travel on the road alongside more than one other pedestrian or vehicle travelling on the road in the same direction as the pedestrian unless the pedestrian is overtaking other pedestrians. Regulation 2382AB is poorly worded. The appellant asked this court to find that it meant that a pedestrian should walk along the roadway so that they were on the same side as and facing oncoming traffic. That is, in the instant case, the appellant contends that Mr. Eden ought to have been walking on the east side of the road. I can understand that at a theoretical level, walking on a roadway facing approaching traffic on the same side of the road as that traffic might be safer. The pedestrian will see approaching traffic, and it is probably more likely that the approaching traffic will recognize the pedestrian earlier. Probably the construction of the regulation urged by the appellant is correct. However, the difficulty facing the appellant is that the words of Reg 238AB do not not clearly say that. In fact, just before the accident, Mr. Eden was doing what the literal words of the regulation provide. He was facing the approaching traffic, the bicycles, which were moving in the opposite direction which he was moving. This meant he had his back to the HiLux. Perhaps the legislature should give consideration when making the provision at Reg 2382AB clearer. In any event, it is not necessary to decide whether or not the provision ought to be interpreted as the appellant contends, for in this case it seems clear that the proviso to Reg 2382AB applies. Even if the regulation is construed as meaning that Mr. Eden ought to have been walking on the east side of the roadway, he was only obliged to do so if it was not impractical for him to do so. Here it seems to me that the facts found by the primary judge meant that it was impractical to do so. Mr. Eden had only begun walking on the Dysart Bypass Road a short time before the accident. From the time he commenced to do so, or also from the time he commenced to do so, he could see lights coming from the north towards him, and rather than cross the road in front of them to walk on the eastern side of the roadway, he decided to wait until what he thought was a vehicle that had passed. It was not pleaded that the contrary negligence in Mr. Eden commencing to walk on the western side of the Dysart Bypass Road for the short time between his arriving at the intersection of that road and the dirt track, and his seeing the lights travelling south towards him. This matter remained unexplored at trial, and there was no precise evidence about how long Mr. Eden walked on the western side of the road before seeing the oncoming lights. It appears to have been a very short time. In circumstances where the road was dark and Mr. Eden interpreted the two bicycle lights as an oncoming vehicle, I think it was impracticable for him to cross the road and begin walking on the eastern side of the road, where to do so, 1, would have crossed in front of what he thought was an oncoming car, and 2, would have put him on the eastern side of the road where he knew the verge fell away so that he could not safely use it if the car, as he thought it, did not pull into the centre of the road when it drew level with him. The primary judge found that in walking on the western side of the road, Mr. Eden took the safest course available. The appellant's counsel came to this court saying expressly that he did not challenge any factual findings made by the primary judge. Belatedly seeking to depart from this position, he could not point to any facts, matters or circumstances which would compel this court to come to a different conclusion from the judge below. The reasons for Mr. Eden walking on the roadway itself rather than the footpath or nature strip, Reg 2381, have already been canvassed. In these circumstances, it seems to me that the appeal must be dismissed. So let's just do a quick recap of that. Basically, you've got a guy, he's coming home from the bottle shop, he's going over to his mate's place, he's walking down the street. There's probably one lane on either side, there's no footpaths, there's grass verge which is not maintained or safe to walk on, and he's walking along. In the opposite direction are two bicycles. It's dark, they're riding side by side, which they are fully entitled to do, and their lights are quite bright, which is very safe for them to do so. So the two cyclists are doing that. Humans are not able to determine speed very well. You've got a guy who's in a Toyota HiLux who wasn't expecting to see a pedestrian there walking along on the left-hand side, and he's not realised that the pedestrian was there. He's avoided the pedestrian and then swerved right and then hit one of those cyclists.
That's right. That is always where the offence lies, and the injuries took place. The casualties happen when the driver of the car hit the oncoming cyclists. Obviously, it's one of those judgments that you can say, well, it doesn't defy common sense. It lives up to what we would expect from common sense verdict. I think that the crux of it is that how long was the pedestrian on what we would determine the wrong side of the road? And I think one of the points brought out in that transcript is that they concluded that it wasn't very long. So if you turn into a street and you're not facing oncoming traffic, but you are intending to cross over to the correct side of the road so that you are facing oncoming traffic, you're actually not doing anything wrong. And the reasoning behind that is obviously the gentleman thought the two oncoming lights were vehicles, or a vehicle that would have meant if he had tried to cross the road, he would be walking into danger, potentially, of a faster moving oncoming vehicle. But I think one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this was the judge thought that the rule wasn't worded very well, and the judge was probably correct. There are ways that you could enhance that rule to make it much clearer. There's a big push everywhere in all public service areas, including legislation, to get things in plain English so that every person reading it can understand it without having to go to a lawyer, without having to get professional assistance with what does this all mean. It should be clear. And I think this is probably one of those situations where the rule isn't as clear as it could be.
Yeah, what I thought was really interesting about this is in Japan, the driver is always culpable.
Oh, yes.
That's the same in Europe as well, in many places.
There are some jurisdictions where if you hit somebody on the side of the road and kill them with drunk driving to the point where you are crazy, dangerous driving, all of those sorts of things can carry quite long prison terms.
So in terms of this, what do you think is a better way to write that road rule? Where is the lack of clarity?
Well, I know when we discussed this as part of the road rules, and it was a national amendment, if I remember correctly. It wasn't just Queensland. The key thing to understand is we were all very aware that for a long period of time before this rule was amended, it was generally good road safety practice and good advice that if you're walking on a road, then you walk facing oncoming traffic, wherever practicable. When you look at the way that the rule currently is structured, I'm sure there are ways where you could actually make it plain English to the point where if you are walking on a road where there is no footpath or where it's impracticable to use a footpath or nature strip, you must face oncoming traffic.
So face oncoming traffic on your side of the street.
Yeah.
Right, but maybe that's what is here is the fact that it's oncoming traffic and it could be on either side of the street, or is that not?
No, but I think this was a situation where the cyclists were on the correct side of the street. They were coming towards this intersection perfectly legally on their side of the street. Imagine you've got an intersection, you've got a person with the carrying the beer can on the left-hand side, right? You've got a car coming along here, you've got oncoming vehicles, you've got this guy thinking, I really ought to be on the other side of the road facing oncoming traffic and preparing to do that, seeing the headlights coming towards him, thinking, is that a car or what? He's entitled to think that those two headlights is a car rather than two cycles. You could say, well, if he's on the other side of the road, then he would have been safer. The accident probably wouldn't have happened, but he's entitled to take his time and determine whether it's safe for him to cross the road in order to get to that place of safety. In other words, facing oncoming traffic towards you. It's fraught because you have to try and make it clear from a legal perspective, but you've also got to try and make it clear to the average person reading it. There is certainly scope for making that rule and others like it plain English and easier to understand.
I think about also the fact that the old guy who was driving his HiLux tried to appeal the case.
Yes, well, his insurance company did, having to pay a big payout. As I said at the beginning, common sense prevailed in this one. It was the 80-year-old guy in the ute that hit the cyclists and caused the trauma, and he deserves to take the rap.
Okay, so now I'm going to go on to a slightly more contentious topic. So technically, Mr. HiLux driving 80-year-old,
yes,
know what that's called.
Driving without due care and attention is probably the lower level. Dangerous driving causing injury is another high level. That's probably because we haven't got the transcript of the original court case.
No.
He would have been prosecuted under one of those two rules: not causing death by driving dangerously, causing serious injury, grievous bodily harm by driving dangerously.
You've got murder, you intend to kill them. Manslaughter, you kill them but you didn't intend to, it's just one of those things. And you cause grievous bodily harm. Why is it that you don't call it manslaughter by car, because you would call it manslaughter by gun or manslaughter by something else? Why is it given a different term which dulls down? Why don't you call it causing grievous bodily harm by car, as you would say with a gun or an axe or a baton or a piece of wood or whatever?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not sure I can answer that one, because there are a lot of rules in the Act. We're not talking about the road rules here. We're talking about the Transport Operations Road Use Management Act, which is primary legislation. That's the legislation that carries all these higher rules. Dangerous driving causing death. That's pretty strong wording.
Well, I don't think it's as high as saying manslaughter by car.
Okay, but again, they're talking about terminology here.
Yeah, well, language
matters.
we might. Language matters, because if you say it was an accident, you go, well, can't be helped. But if you say it was a collision, if you say Mr. HiLux was driving along and he saw the bloke on the left-hand side, and so he drove into a cyclist. That's a very different thing to, a cyclist was hit by a car. That's a very different. So language is
Terminology does affect the way you think about something.
Absolutely.
We get it in the whole field of motorcycling as well. Very often when you see the police report, it's a motorcycle collided with a car.
I know.
And you sort of think, hang on a minute.
Exactly.
It's the other way round. Mate.
Exactly.
Often.
And so that's why I'm going, why is it that we don't go manslaughter by car, grievous bodily harm by car? By doing that, we would actually start to get some more onus on car drivers to be responsible, because they are driving a great big death machine. They're the ones who are actually killing everybody else. People don't get killed by a motorcycle. They might be riding it and a bit stupid and going too fast. That's one thing. But as you say, they don't drive into a car intentionally. They're not the ones at fault if you're driving into a car.
Yeah, and usually, collisions that occur between pedestrians and cyclists or foot scooters or whatever, 99 of them would be much lower level.
Yeah.
There's not many people die from those sorts of crashes.
No, there
It's
aren't.
usually the big heavy car of some kind or other that causes or creates the trauma.
Yeah. Anything else before we wrap up for the year?
Yeah, let's see some road rules changes. Let's see some plain English come into the road rules, and there's such a lot of red tape and rubbish there that could be gotten rid of to the benefit of everybody, including the legislators.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. And I want to see another term for manslaughter by car.
It's a letter to the minister. I can hear a letter to the minister brewing here, Wendy.
I asked a friend of mine who's very creative, and she said dead carnation.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
And I thought that's one for our road safety professionals, or road danger professionals, I should call them, because it's not road safety, it's actually road danger. What we're doing is we're mitigating the road danger. That's another way of where the language has been twisted. What we're talking about is road danger.
It's interesting. I like that. Road safety or road danger.
All right.
Like it.
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up for the year. Thank you very much, John. It's been great
Wendy.
fun.
Good to be here.
And
Good to talk to you.
yeah, and it's been great to have our little friendship bloom. Lovely. And thank you for everything that you've contributed and your wise words.
It's a pleasure. Roll on next year.
All right. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you, Wendy. Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.